What if you could pull back from all the crazy of the holidays and reclaim some space for you and your family and your faith? I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, I welcome Becky Kiser. In trying to find a little sanity for she and her family regarding all things holidays, Becky started something of a movement, and you're going to want to hear how it changed her approach to how we celebrate. Becky, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on. I'm so excited.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, the fam, all that.
Okay, so I live in the Woodlands, Texas, which is just north of Houston. I have been married to my husband, Chris, for 11 years, and then we have 3 girls. So a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, and 8-year-old. So I tell people all the time, we have lots of tears and tantrums and twirling and glitter in every crevice of our household.
So I love the 3-girl thing. We've got 5 girls and 3 boys, and I think that it's so fun to be able to see families. It really is fascinating that the demeanor of your family, depending on the mix of kids you've got and ages and stages, it really does change things up. So now, are you someone who's always been sort of a holiday nerd?
Are you calling me a nerd, Julie?
I'm just. I'll come up with something better, but I'm still on my first cup of decaf. So
yes, I love people and I love celebrating. I wouldn't say necessarily the holidays have always been my bent. They're just something that I've been drawn to. So, and I think having kids grew that love for the holidays. Like getting to see them experience it and express it, and all the decorations and all the flavors and all the smells, like. Being a mom has intensified that desire to celebrate well. But I wouldn't say that it's even something that I was super passionate about. And then on the flip side, from a spiritual point, I never intended to start a holiday ministry. I have a ministry called Sacred Holidays, and it wouldn't say it happened by accident, but it didn't happen with intention either. Does that make sense?
Right. So how did it happen? How did you end up in this lane?
I have, like you, I've always taught Bible study and spoken different places and have a love for writing. But then I had children, and that just kind of for a season kind of settled me for a bit. And when my oldest was a baby is when I was like, I want these holidays to be more meaningful than what they are. I saw the grandparents with all the love that they have go a little crazy over the kids. I saw myself feel the pressure, even with an infant who could not play with anything, want to get her all these things, and calendars getting busy. And that was just when Advent was starting to become trendy. And I had grown up, my parents are divorced. My mom is atheist, but my dad and stepmom grew up in a denomination that celebrated those more liturgical holidays like Advent and Lent. And I thought then, I was like, maybe that's what I need to do to recenter my heart, is to start being not just intentional on Christmas Day, that there's some Jesus element to it, but that this whole Advent season, the days leading up to Christmas, have significance. And so after doing that personally for a couple of years, about 3 years ago, I had friends say to me, why don't you write a Bible study and we just kind of all do it together? So it started so that's what I'd say is it didn't start by accident, but I didn't mean to start an entire ministry. I just put together the first Advent study that first year for myself and my friends. It was single-sided, spiral bound, horrible fonts. Like it was so bad, but it was so beautiful too. Because it brought our hearts to the Lord. And for me, I didn't realize I was taking my first step into what this thing would become. I just simply knew I wanted to focus my heart on Jesus, and I wanted to help my friends do the same. So that's how it started 3 years ago.
And so now we're all the way up to a new book called Sacred Holidays, Less Chaos, More Jesus. And that is recently launched. We're so thrilled for you, Becky. And let me ask you this, within the Christian lane, within the faith lane, there are some really wildly divergent opinions about if people should be celebrating holidays at all, because to be honest, a lot of them do have some, they've got some family skeletons. They've got some things in the background that,
Such a good way to say it, Julie. I'm going to start using that one.
You go for it. And sometimes when we try to ignore some of those origins, we're not being exactly intellectually honest. At the same time, I don't know that because some of those family skeletons are there necessarily should keep us to the place where we're not using these holidays that are recognized within our culture as a place to be very intentional about spreading the message of Jesus. So how do you handle all of that? Because again, a lot of different opinions.
And I enter this one with like a very tender heart, because I know we have all, it's like politics, like we kind of are all ranging in different areas. And with holidays specifically, I don't think there's like a wrong place to be. The position we always need to take with it is just open-handed, open-hearted to Jesus. And for me, where I've been with it is, yes, so specifically like right now with all the holidays approaching, Halloween, of people, well, I don't know, does it have pagan or satanic roots? I'm not sure. And Valentine's Day, it's just so commercial. Like every single holiday, you're right, it has some historical skeletons that could scare us. And that's actually in the book. For each holiday chapter, we do a quick history, like, hey, just so you know, here's some context of what is actual truth of the history of the holiday. And where I always bring women back to, though, is, but let's look at your current context for Halloween specifically. For me, it's, you know, like in my neighborhood, in my city, with my friends and people that both go to church and don't go to church, it's just not, it has no pagan connotations. It is about kids dressing up cute and adults dressing up funny and handing out a ton of candy. And that's really what Halloween is about for my context. And I would dare say for most people's context. So what I encourage women to do is look at your context and look at what it means for you. And we get to set the course of what the holiday is about. So if you don't want it to have negative, scary, or pagan connotations, then let's celebrate it a different way. Or if you don't want it to have the commercialized trend and bent that it has, well, that's kind of what this whole book is about, is to help show you better ways to live so you don't fall into the traps, but we live differently. We live as light in the world and not hide in the darkness ourselves.
And I think that's one of the things I just love in your new book, Sacred Holidays, Less Chaos, More Jesus, is that, you know, you don't just focus in on just one particular holiday. And I think there's a place for that, and that's great. But totally. I love this idea of bringing our faith experience to every holiday, yes. Not just Christmas. You know, Christmas yes. a lot of times gets the bulk of the Christian experience, or Easter.
Totally. Yes.
But I love this idea of bringing it all into play. And we have a similar experience in our neighborhood when it comes to trick-or-treating. It is definitely the time that we are able to really be awesome neighbors, because people are being so welcoming and open to just chatting and having conversation. And so I think there are those ways that you can really reach out to others, but it shouldn't only just be over the controversies, if you will, of Halloween and Christmas. What are things we can do about Thanksgiving that can really make that something that, you know, we talk about being grateful, but how can we really focus Thanksgiving on the Christ child and on the Christ message?
You know, for me, so what I talk about in the book a lot of, like, sacred simply means holy and set apart. And we give ideas for holy ideas, which is all about Jesus, and set apart ideas, which is all about intentionality. And what I try to remind myself during all the different holidays and other women is sometimes it's not overtly spiritual, right? So sometimes even at Thanksgiving, it's not how do we celebrate Jesus, but Jesus was about loving God and loving others. And so, like, a specific thing that you can do is do your own personal gratitude challenge, and just starting each day being thankful for God. So I have young kids in my house, so I express it. I take some branches off of a tree outside, and then I have these little wooden leaves I get from Hobby Lobby. And so I have a bowl of leaves and I have a bowl of Sharpies, and then I have these branches in a vase, and I invite myself and I invite my kids, and we invite anyone who comes into our doors to write something they're thankful for God for providing in their life and hang it on the tree. And so we have like this tree. And that's not necessarily like a super spiritual, let's study gratitude in the Bible, which totally has its place. And maybe for some people that would be a good practice to do. But it's just simply saying, what are little ways I can shift my heart's affection to loving God and loving others? And so for me during Thanksgiving, that's a big one. It's the first thing I do. I get my coffee going, and then I walk over to the tree in the morning and I think of, okay, Lord, show me one thing. And maybe it's a big thing, and maybe it's simply that I'm brewing coffee and I'm going to get through the day because I have my coffee in my cup. That's one step that I do during Thanksgiving.
I love that. Now, you write about in your new book, Sacred Holidays, you write about that sometimes we need to sort of clear out the regrets that we may have surrounding certain holidays, which, you know, a lot of times we'll talk about people maybe feeling down during the holidays because they're longing for how it used to be, or they're longing for some kind of expectation that's never going to be. But talk about this regrets thing. This is kind of a new spin on the emotions that do come at holiday time.
Oh, I'm so glad you like that part, Julie. So the very first chapter, before we start into the holiday chapters, which is probably why most people picked up the book, I wanted just all of us, we go into the holidays already feeling usually either overwhelmed because we know what might be happening or regretting all the ways we failed in the past. And so we already step into it with shame. So I actually, in the book, have women, there's journaling space all throughout the book. And in the first chapter, we talk about regrets of, I want you to list out what are regrets you have with Thanksgiving? What are regrets you have with Christmas? And sometimes, as Christians, we don't know what to do with the negative elements of our life because we feel like, well, everything should be good and peaceful and awesome. And so when there's negative, when there's shame, we just kind of stuff it because we aren't sure what to do with it. The very first step we take in the book is let's name it. Let's say the things that we wish weren't true at Halloween and Thanksgiving and birthdays and Christmas and all those things and take them before the Lord and say, sometimes we need to repent from sin, and sometimes we just need to take those tender emotions to the Father and ask Him to do something with them. So that's the very first step, because otherwise, if we just stuff down the regrets, if we just stuff down the shame, we can't walk in freedom and truth, right? Like we're walking forward almost in a facade and not in truth of who we are.
Right. And, this brings up an interesting point when we come to regrets, because I myself, my folks really did, in my eyes, this amazing job. For example, Christmas. I mean, it was just all the things. It was the most amazing experience, and on and on and on and on. I mean, it just felt like the presents were never ending, and everything just seemed more magical. And so once I started having children, I felt like I had to achieve that. And we were on this little tiny budget and, all the different things. And then I had that moment that one of my brothers had all of our 8mm family film converted into DVDs. And I went back to look at Christmas, all the Christmases. And Becky, here's the thing. Like, the tree was cute, but it wasn't, 30 feet tall. And there were presents under the tree, but not gajillions. It's interesting, the bar that I had set for myself based on my child's perspective. And yet at the same time, I have to ask myself, okay, what kind of bar am I setting for my own children? What are they thinking they're going to have to achieve when it comes to having this special time of the year, all these different times of the year? So how can we make sure that, yes, we're making it memorable, we're making it fun, we're making it magical, we're making it have the right focus, but at the same time, not set the bar to something that then our kids feel some kind of weird pressure to try to achieve Disney World status when it comes to all these different holidays?
That's a really great question. And I guess I honestly haven't even considered that because my kids are still so young. I've more in this stage, because my kids are younger, I have had lots of older parents say, more set the expectations for yourself. Like, if you're going to do Disney Christmas when they're 3 years old, what is that going to look like when they're 15? And you're giving them 20 presents, but now you can't just buy $25 presents. They're $20, $50 presents.
Right.
Like with that, I think in the book, the realistic expectations and then stepping into each holiday with a game plan that will coach you through, it's simply saying that choice of, I don't want a Disney Christmas. I want a meaningful Christmas. And so I'm going to instead limit. So like for our kids specifically, we don't go crazy at Christmas time with them. We know grandparents are going to handle that for us. We get a very small amount of presents because for our family, the culture that it's about what traditions do you want? What do you want the holidays to be about for your family? And so for us, we want to create all that magical, that Disney World experience you were talking about, Julie, that you remembered from your childhood, even if it wasn't exactly the reality. I want my kids to have that now, but somehow experience that in the celebration of Jesus. So we've just kind of pulled away from some of those traditions that either we experienced growing up or that culture sets for us today. And we're just trying to find new ways they can feel just as magical and fun in Disney World, like you had said, but that they're rooted in deeper, meaningful things, and they're not contingent on how many presents did I get, or do I not still believe in Santa, and all the other things. It has a deeper, consistent meaning regardless of circumstances.
We'll be right back with Becky Kiser, but first a word from Compassion International on how to put your gratitude into action this season. It's a month of gratitude, blessings, and family traditions. It's a time to bring out the nice china and make a few extra spots at the table for company. And it's also a time that you can show your Thanksgiving to a child in need. I think that true gratitude always comes with a response of sharing what we have, of making sure that others have what they need. This season of Thanksgiving, give back. It costs just a little over $1 a day, takes just a couple of minutes to set up, and a child in need will have the medical, spiritual, and educational care that they need because of you. Let's really celebrate Thanksgiving this year by putting action to the occasion and sponsoring a child through Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/allmomdoes to make your heart of Thanksgiving last all year long. Compassion.com/allmomdoes. Now, this is kind of an off-the-cuff question that may just take a squirrel trail that you're like, but I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I go back to that's interesting is, let's take Christmas, for example. There's a lot predicated on getting presents if you're good. And, you know, that is a very interesting message to try to cram into our Christian understanding of grace.
Right.
Now, I'm kind of curious, what do we do with that? Because it's sort of this very, forgive the phrase, but works-based holiday. So how are you navigating that with your girls that it seems sort of like a harmless tradition, and it really may be. You know, it really may be. But it is a very different message in its corollary to where we're also celebrating the birth of the Savior who would come in grace for us and would just bring good gifts because of how good he is. So how are you navigating that?
You know, Julie, this is something I actually am super passionate about, but I also know, again, like, really a lot of things holiday, we all land in different places. But what I've seen with my girls is that there's just this pressure on kids of good behavior, you know, and then enter in Elf on the Shelf a few years ago. It like heightened it to a whole new level. Like the teachers have the Elf on the Shelves in the classrooms, and there's just this constant messaging. Santa's watching, or the elf now is watching. And to me, it's a bribe-based parenting strategy, which has just never been our thing. And obviously we all bribe our kids at various times when we need it in the moment. But when we're saying for months, I'm going to use this one day of presents as you better behave because Santa is watching, or you better behave because the elf is watching. You're right. It's putting wrong parenting strategy that I think we don't really want to do, but it's an easier one to do. It's doing that, and it's teaching a different messaging that if you behave well, then you receive things. And now there is principles to that too, right? Like if you don't behave well, you don't deserve things. So for our kids, what we do is we just switch the conversation. At birthday, we go crazy over our kids. That is the day we celebrate them. We want them to feel every good gift. We want them to feel spoiled rotten. But at Christmas time, they don't make a wish list. They make a giving list. And so we try to shift their perspective of this is a season to give and to give to others and to celebrate. And so they make a wish list of all their friends and families that they want to give gifts to, but we have never once had our kids make a wish list. So we just change that conversation because we want them when they receive things to not be like, oh, I asked for this or asked for this. Why didn't I get this? Because it's not about that. It's about receiving all the gifts with a happy heart. And so for them, really on Christmas Day, they are so excited to give the thing that they thought about. And my oldest is 8 now. And so it's just really been fun these past 2 years because she really thinks through her gifts, where before we always take them to the dollar store because you know, like that's cheaper. And we both come from divorced homes. So we have tons of family, and it's an easy way to do it. And like, it's so cute too, because they'll give a grandfather Barbie hairspray and another grandfather a women's crossword puzzle book, like super cute. And they're so proud to give over that gift. And now as my oldest is getting older, she's really thinking it through. Like she spends a lot of time on the aisles trying to find the perfect thing, and it's just creating that culture. But we start the dollar store when they're 2 years old of how can we focus this on loving others and giving to others and making it a day that's about generosity as opposed to greed.
I love that distinction about making the birthday the big one for each child in terms of really making them feel seen and special and set apart. I think that's amazing. And then really focus on how to give. You know, I think that's just really a beautiful, beautiful, just subtle and yet profound change in how we look at a lot of these holidays. Now, I know this is a buzzword. I know like people like to throw it around, but it is a real thing. How do we make sure that we're also engaging in self-care? Because at least the reality for a lot of us mamas is that we're working, we're doing all the things, we're taking care of everybody, and then we add this crazy bonus round of trying to pull off these various holidays, all the food, all the decor, all of the presents, all of the things. So how do you make sure that you are staying in a good and healthy place as you are really working hard to make sure that these holidays do feel sacred and have a really powerful and profound perspective?
Oh man, this is such a big thing, Julie. In the book, there's a whole section, part 3, that's all the common struggles that weren't in the initial outline. But as I was writing the chapters, I was like, I can't survive the holidays without talking about these things that help. They're like my survival toolkit.
Right.
So we talk about like realistic expectations and conflict and drama, and then so many more things too. And for me, the survival, that self-care, it's kind of twofold. So survival as a follower of Jesus, it's saying, instead of trying so hard to make it all about all the things, I have got this cannot be the time I take a dip with my time with the Lord. That's kind of when churches take a break from studies. And I've seen when I go speak places and talk to friends, and for myself, I just became inconsistent with him. I stopped spending time with him. You're traveling or you have people in your home, and so that you're just out of your groove. So during the holidays, what I challenge women is like, there's no better time than to push harder and to say, I'm going to really dive in. For me, the greatest self-care is my alone time with the Lord, studying scripture, journaling and prayer, and just making sure my heart is set. And then as I'm moving on throughout my day, that realistic expectation, because for me, it's a biggie. What are my realistic expectations for myself? What are some of those things that trip me up? For me, social media can be a big thing of like, oh, they're doing this, I want to do this.
Right.
But then also having realistic expectations of others. You know, like I had a counselor tell me one time, Becky, you can only expect of others what they're able to offer you. And it blew my mind and have changed every relationship I've had since then. There's this one family member you're struggling with. Like I actually sit down before most holidays and just say, okay, who am I going to be around? What can I realistically expect them to have? And then there's not disappointments anymore. That I expect that they are going to behave a certain way because it's how they've always behaved, and still temper that with the hope of Christ of praying, Jesus, but redeem this and change this. And I want it to be different and better. And that tension of faith and realistic expectations kind of coinciding.
You know, I love that you bring up family, extended family, you know, all the iterations of that, because that is one of the things that people point to the most that stresses them out in the holiday season is people that they love and they know they need to be connected to, but maybe they're not doing a lot of life with. And all of a sudden you are doing hardcore life, you know, full on menu and days together and on and on and on. And so I think that place of remembering and being intentional, oh yeah, how am I going to manage, not stress out, not criticize, not freak out, but what do I need to do to have myself ready to walk back into some of these family relationships that can be a little more complex? Because let's face it, for everybody, some of the stress can come when you go from what feels like 0 to 60 in terms of all of this contact with each other. So what are some of, I love what your counselor told you. I think that's amazing. What are some other things that we can do to really make sure we're navigating the good ship extended family well through what can be some rocky waters at the holiday season?
Right. I would say not to be a victim to your circumstances. So I think sometimes we're like, I'm just going to push through, or, oh, they're going to be here, or, oh, she's going to do this again. We kind of play a victim like, well, it's just going to be the way it is. And we go numb, or for me, I can go back to the 13-year-old version of myself sometimes of just, we don't behave maturely. And so I think it's saying, listen, we're grown-up women, right? And we're going to own the holiday, and we're going to own it with faith and courage. And we're going to go into it prepared, not just pushing through, not just trying to make the most of it, but we're going to actually prepare ahead of time. So my greatest encouragement that I have to discipline myself to do is to go into it with intention. So I know if I'm going to be traveling to family members' homes, I think through, okay, when am I going to spend time with the Lord? Like I know I need that time for me to function like a healthy person. So how am I going to make that happen? Do I need to try to go to a coffee shop? Should I wake up earlier even though I'd rather sleep? Do I need to just be okay with excusing myself after dinner for a little bit, or whatever is those circumstances? Setting up some of that time and not being afraid to hurt someone's feelings. I think is kind of one of the biggest things of you have to plan. We can't just push through and try survival mode, or just because you're in somebody else's house doesn't mean you can't still set up healthy boundaries. And so I would encourage women, as I have to still encourage myself, plan ahead for all things. Plan ahead for how you're going to get your whatever you need to do for self-care. Plan ahead for how you're going to love others well while you're there. And plan ahead for any of those things that you're like, I know this happens every single time and it drives me bonkers. How might you respond to it differently this year so that it doesn't become something that you're like, because we don't want to hate our holidays. They're supposed to be the best time. And so let's live through them with greater intention. And I think that's going to help shift the course of them completely for us.
And, I want to give a word of encouragement to our listeners, too. When your kids are in your house, this is your time to do the holidays for the family you've built with your spouse. We've got extended family that we adore. They're scattered all over the place. But we were always really insistent that there were certain holidays that anybody was welcome to come join us. Yeah. But there were certain things and certain traditions that were going to happen in our home, because it was always with the eye of when our kids launch, we want them to have had these kind of experiences with our little crew, right? I say little, that's hilarious. Our Decadron 10-part crew.
Family,
our little tiny family. Yeah, our little tiny family. And now that I've got these adult kids who are launching and they have different people that they're getting involved with, and on and on and on. I didn't realize it at the time when those oldest kids were little. I am so glad now that we really did take the time to say, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, and to have a very open door. Yeah. But I just want to encourage those mamas out there who feel like, oh, but my husband's mother-in-law, she expects we're going to do this, that, and the other. Well, girlfriend, this is your time. You don't get these years back with your little ones. Yeah. And so make sure that you're getting to do it. If you're waiting, when I have grandkids, let me tell you, I'm on the grandparent waiting list right now. So you don't want to put all of that on when you have grandkids. So you want to do it when you've got those little ones still at home. Part of your message, Becky, that I think is so important is often it feels like as women, the holidays are happening to us. We get on the crazy train and it just starts going. It is the Polar Express that looks a little scary. And so this idea of being really intentional to make sure that we are the ones helping guide and make the holidays instead of them trying to make us. You also bring up, and I think there are some of us who have some history with this, but some of us who don't. A lot of what we're talking about here is not completely just off the rails and some new thing. Mm-hmm. Early Christians actually put together some holidays that were to be times of reflection, that were to be times of preparing the heart. So talk about Advent and Lent, because these are ancient practices that I feel like in many ways, a lot of us are just beginning to rediscover and go, is this a thing? Has this been around?
Right. Yes, and it has. Advent and Lent so liturgical is just, some churches practice those depending on the denomination. But even if you saw it practiced at your church growing up or had friends that practiced it, it was still even then church-based. And it's just been in recent years that people are like, I can take this similar approach in my own life with my own family. And so for me, it's radically shifted that commercialism that we're like, I don't understand why we're buying a bunch of presents when we're supposed to be celebrating that baby Jesus has finally come. And that tension we feel just re-engages our heart to something different when we choose to celebrate Advent and Lent. So they've been around forever, but they have not always been around in people's homes. That's something that's really been new to the table within the past 5 to 10 years on the rise. But that has been one of the things that's been a big shift for me of saying on these specifically, these are clearly spiritual holidays. The other one, Valentine's Day and New Year's and summer and Halloween, and those, we make them spiritual because we are spiritual humans who are following and loving Jesus. But for Christmas, I would challenge all Christians, if you follow Jesus, then this is that time for Christmas where you say, I want to celebrate that he has come. And not just like baby Jesus in a manger that we aren't quite sure what to do with, but to step into the place of the people then, of that they had waited and waited and waited. And that's why for Advent, a common tradition that I'd encourage most people to start doing as like the first baby step is to do Advent candles in your home. And you take 5 candles and you start with them all unlit as a reminder to you of like, oh yeah, that I know Jesus and I know the story of Jesus, but there was a time where I was in total darkness, but there was a time where people we're actually in darkness. Jesus had not yet stepped onto the earth in flesh form. And we start with darkness. And then in Advent, every Sunday, 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas, and then on Christmas Day, you light a new candle. And you see the light get brighter and brighter and brighter because you're celebrating Jesus who has come. And those simple practices, Julie, of shifting to focus on the worship of Jesus changes. Like for me, I feel just as much like giddiness when I get to turn on I say turn on because I have kids, so I have battery operated candles. When I turn on my candles in the morning as I do to turn on my Christmas tree, like, because there's this deep meaning of every day I turn those on, it's a reminder I'm seeing the light get brighter. And the closer we get to Jesus' coming, the brighter the lights get. And that's true for us too, that the closer we get to Jesus, the more he's lighting our path, the greater he's taking what feels unknown and is giving us great hope. And so that's why I encourage women to take these specifically spiritual holidays like Advent and Lent and really dive into them.
I think that's so beautiful. Becky, we're so excited about your new book, Sacred Holidays, Less Chaos, More Jesus. Becky, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Julie.
Absolutely. And happy sacred holidays for you, for all of them coming up. So appreciate you helping us get our perspective right again.
Thank you.
You can connect with Becky at sacredholidays.com and on the socials at Sacred Holidays. And you can connect with me too on all the socials at Julie Lyles Carr. And be sure and use the hashtag Raising an Original when you're reading my book so I can follow along and share. Donna Tody and Rebecca Beckett, you're the best. Donna is our producer and Rebecca is our content coordinator, and they are the amazing team that makes sure the podcast gets out into the world each week. Make sure you subscribed and leave us a 5-star review and comment. In the world of podcasting, it really does help make sure that others can find us. Check out AllMomDoes on the socials and the website. It's a fantastic place of information and inspiration for your modern mom journey. Coming up on the next episode of the Modern Motherhood Podcast, she is a dynamic leader, author, and speaker, and she's wanting to change the way you look at your quiet time and how you study the Word of God. She's Lenya Heitzig, and I can't wait for you to hear our amazing conversation on the next The Modern Motherhood Podcast.